Thomas did not return to Forrester Creations with the arrogance many expected. There was no triumphant stride through the halls, no deliberate reminder of past glories, no visible hunger for applause. On the surface, his comeback was disciplined, restrained, and meticulously professional. He accepted the position of lead designer with a quiet nod, spoke in measured tones about collaboration and responsibility, and emphasized his commitment to boundaries he claimed to understand at last. Yet beneath that carefully constructed composure, something unresolved lingered, something that refused to be disciplined into silence. His eyes, whenever they lifted toward Hope Logan, betrayed the truth he never spoke aloud. They carried a weight that was not about fashion or legacy, but about history, obsession, and a love that had never truly been laid to rest. Hope sensed it immediately, even if she did not allow herself to name it. She told herself that Thomas's intensity was simply part of his creative nature, that his focus was directed at the work, not at her. Still, there was a familiarity in the way he watched her, a quiet attentiveness that unsettled her more than open pursuit ever had. Hope had worked too hard to rebuild her life, to redefine herself after years of turmoil, to risk being pulled back into a dynamic she knew was dangerous. She reminded herself daily that professionalism was the only safe language between them. At first, the collaboration worked. More than that, it thrived. Thomas brought precision and boldness to the designs, while Hope anchored the line with clarity and purpose. Together, they revitalized the brand in ways that impressed even their harshest critics. Late nights became routine, not out of indulgence, but necessity. Deadlines pressed closer, collections demanded perfection, and the shared pressure forged a sense of unity that felt productive rather than personal. Also, Hope insisted to herself. Yet proximity has a way of eroding certainty. As weeks passed, moments began to slip through the cracks of professionalism. A shared laugh over a design mishap. A pause that lingered a second too long. A look exchanged across the workroom that carried more history than the present could comfortably contain. Thomas noticed these moments and catalogued them carefully, feeding a hope he pretended not to nurture. To him, they were signs, not of temptation, but of destiny reasserting itself despite every attempt to deny it. Thomas told himself he had changed, that he would not cross lines again, that restraint proved his growth. But restraint, when fueled by longing, often becomes its own form of obsession. The more he tried to suppress his feelings, the more they sharpened, transforming into a quiet conviction that Hope's resistance was not rejection, but fear. Fear of what she felt, fear of what their connection might mean. In his mind, patience became virtue, and waiting became proof of love. The night everything shifted arrived without ceremony. The building was nearly empty, lights dimmed to their after-hours glow, the hum of machines replaced by silence broken only by the occasional rustle of fabric. Hope was exhausted, emotionally raw after a difficult day, that had nothing to do with Thomas and everything to do with the weight of expectation she carried everywhere. She allowed herself, just for that moment, to let her guard down. She spoke about doubt, about feeling stretched between who she was expected to be and who she feared she was becoming. It was not a confession of desire, but of vulnerability. Thomas listened with an intensity that bordered on reverence. To him, this was intimacy, the kind he had waited for, the kind that justified everything he had endured. When he responded, his words were careful, but their implication was not. He spoke of understanding her, of seeing her in ways others never had, of believing in a connection that survived every attempt to extinguish it. His tone remained soft, almost respectful, but the message pressed unmistakably against the boundaries Hope had tried so hard to maintain. The moment froze her. Hope felt a surge of confusion, a collision of guilt and awareness that made it difficult to breathe. She did not reciprocate, but she did not immediately pull away either, and that hesitation haunted her. She knew she had crossed an invisible line simply by allowing the moment to exist. When she finally stepped back, reasserting distance, the damage was already done, not because of what happened, but because of what she felt stirring inside herself. In the days that followed, Hope was consumed by an internal battle she could not share with anyone. She loved Liam Spencer, loved the life they had built, the stability they fought to protect. Yet Thomas's attention unsettled her in ways she did not want to examine. It was not desire she felt, she told herself, but the dangerous pull of familiarity, the echo of a past she had never fully processed. Still, guilt clung to her relentlessly, whispering that emotional fidelity mattered as much as physical boundaries. Liam noticed the change almost immediately. It was not dramatic, no sudden coldness, or overt secrecy, but subtle shifts that only someone deeply attuned to hope could detect. She seemed distracted, her smiles slower to arrive, her reassurances slightly delayed. Liam's instincts, sharpened by years of navigating Thomas's presence in their lives, flared with alarm. He tried to suppress it, reminding himself that paranoia had nearly destroyed them before. But the name Thomas Forrester carried too much history to ignore. As Liam's suspicions grew, so did his sense of helplessness. He did not want to accuse Hope without evidence, yet the fear of losing her gnawed at him relentlessly. He watched her more closely, read into small gestures, questioned silences that once felt comfortable. The more he tried to dismiss his unease, the more it demanded his attention. Love, he realized, did not protect against fear, it amplified it. The secret revealed itself not through confession, but discovery. A moment overheard. A message read out of context. Enough to suggest intimacy without confirming betrayal. To Liam, it felt like confirmation of his worst fears. The revelation cracked something fundamental in him, shattering the fragile trust he had worked so hard to preserve. When he confronted Hope, the pain in his eyes cut deeper than any accusation. She could not deny that something had shifted, even if she insisted it had gone no further. The truth, however incomplete, was devastating enough. Thomas did not retreat when the tension surfaced. Instead, he stepped forward with a boldness that shocked even himself. He spoke openly of his feelings, framing them not as temptation, but as inevitability. To him, secrecy was no longer honorable, honesty, even if destructive, felt righteous. By declaring his love, Thomas forced the conflict into the open, stripping Hope of the illusion that she could quietly restore balance without consequences. For Liam, this was war. Not a strategic one, but an emotional reckoning that demanded everything he had. He refused to surrender his family to what he saw as Thomas's manipulation, determined to protect Hope even if it meant confronting her choices head-on. The rivalry between the two men reignited with renewed ferocity, fueled by history, resentment, and the shared knowledge that only one of them could truly claim Hope's future. Caught between them, Hope faced the most painful decision of her life. It was no longer enough to choose safety over chaos, or loyalty over temptation. She had to confront the truth of her own heart, the parts of herself she had tried to silence for the sake of stability. Thomas represented intensity, obsession, and the danger of losing herself in someone else's desire. Liam represented devotion, family, and the promise of a life built on trust rather than turmoil. Hope understood that no choice would be without loss. Choosing Liam meant recommitting to a marriage forever altered by doubt. Choosing Thomas meant stepping into a future haunted by patterns she feared would repeat. As the pressure mounted, Hope realized that the true battle was not between two men, but within herself. She had to decide not who loved her more, but who she wanted to become. The outcome would not simply define her romantic future. It would reshape families, alliances, and the fragile equilibrium at Forrester Creations. Thomas's obsession, Liam's fear, and Hope's longing collided in a storm that threatened to consume them all. And as the lines between past and present blurred, one truth emerged with devastating clarity. Some loves do not fade quietly, they wait, patient and relentless, until the moment they are invited back into the light. The aftermath of Thomas's confession did not explode outward in dramatic spectacle. Instead, it settled over everyone involved like a suffocating fog, altering the shape of daily life in ways both subtle and irreversible. At Forrester Creations, the work continued, sketches refined and fittings scheduled, but the atmosphere had shifted. Every shared space between Hope and Thomas carried an unspoken tension that no amount of professionalism could dissolve. They spoke less, measured their words more carefully, and yet the silence between them felt heavier than any argument could have been. Hope tried to reclaim control by retreating inward. She buried herself in responsibility, convincing herself that discipline could silence confusion. She told herself that clarity would come if she simply held firm to routine, to structure, to the life she had promised herself she would protect. Yet the harder she tried to suppress the storm within her, the more it demanded acknowledgement. At night, when the house was quiet and Liam slept beside her, Hope stared into the darkness and confronted thoughts she had spent years denying. She wondered whether stability had become a refuge or a prison, whether her fear of chaos had slowly taught her to deny parts of herself that still existed, restless and unresolved. Liam, for his part, oscillated between restraint and desperation. He wanted to be the man who trusted, who did not let history dictate his present, yet the echo of Thomas's influence refused to be silenced. Every memory of past manipulation resurfaced with renewed intensity, transforming concern into vigilance. Liam watched Hope with a mixture of love and terror, terrified not only of losing her, but of losing the version of their marriage he believed in. He knew that pushing too hard could drive her away, but doing nothing felt like surrender. The distance between them grew not because of what was said, but because of what could not be. Conversations became cautious, edged with unspoken questions. Hope sensed Liam's fear even when he tried to mask it with reassurance, and that awareness deepened her guilt. She hated that her silence was hurting him, yet she could not bring herself to confess everything she felt, because doing so would force her to confront the magnitude of her uncertainty. Love, she realized, did not guarantee honesty. Sometimes it made honesty unbearable. Meanwhile, Thomas existed in a state of quiet anticipation that bordered on self-destruction. Having declared his feelings, he felt both exposed and liberated. There was no longer any need to pretend indifference, no reason to suppress the truth that had consumed him for so long. Yet the openness he believed would bring relief only intensified his fixation. Every interaction with Hope, no matter how restrained, became charged with possibility in his mind. He interpreted her hesitation as internal conflict rather than rejection, telling himself that her silence was proof she was struggling against feelings she dared not admit. Thomas's sense of purpose narrowed dangerously. He began to see himself as the inevitable answer to Hope's confusion, the one person who truly understood the depth of her internal conflict. This belief did not arrive suddenly, it solidified gradually, reinforced by years of longing and self-justification. He convinced himself that patience was not only virtuous, but necessary, that if he simply remained present, unwavering, Hope would eventually choose authenticity over obligation. The pressure reached a breaking point during a family gathering that should have symbolized unity. Surrounded by familiar faces and shared history, the unspoken conflict between Hope, Liam, and Thomas became impossible to ignore. Every glance felt scrutinized, every smile questioned. The weight of expectation pressed down on Hope until it became unbearable. In that moment, she understood that avoidance was no longer an option. The choice she had been delaying demanded resolution, not just for her own sake, but for everyone caught in the emotional crossfire. Hope withdrew from the gathering early, retreating to a place where she could think without the constant gaze of others. There, she confronted the truth she had feared most. Her heart was fractured not because she loved two men, but because she had been living a life shaped by fear rather than conviction. Liam represented safety, continuity, and the family she cherished. Thomas represented intensity, recognition, and a version of herself she had never fully explored. Neither path was free of consequence, and neither promised certainty. When Liam followed her, the conversation that unfolded was raw and unguarded. Hope did not confess love for Thomas, but she did not deny the emotional pull either. She spoke instead of confusion, of feeling lost between obligation and desire, of being terrified that any choice would cost her something irreplaceable. Liam listened, his heart breaking with every word, yet he recognized that this honesty, painful as it was the first real chance they had at clarity. He realized that holding on to hope through fear would only deepen the divide between them. Thomas, watching from a distance, misread the moment entirely. To him, hope's withdrawal signaled retreat from Liam, not toward resolution. His conviction hardened, transforming patience into entitlement. He began to believe that destiny was merely delayed, not denied, and that his persistence was justified by the depth of his feelings. This shift marked a dangerous turning point, one where hope blurred into obsession once more. In the days that followed, Hope made a decision, not about whom she would choose, but about herself. She asked for space, insisting on distance from both men, until she could confront her own truth without influence or pressure. The request stunned Liam and enraged Thomas in equal measure. For Liam, it felt like loss suspended in uncertainty. For Thomas, it felt like an obstacle imposed by fear rather than choice. Yet Hope stood firm, recognizing that choosing herself, however temporary, was the only way to avoid repeating the cycles that had defined her past. That decision altered everything. Liam was forced to confront the possibility that love did not guarantee permanence, that protecting his family might mean accepting outcomes he could not control. Thomas, stripped of proximity and reassurance, faced the terrifying reality that his feelings did not entitle him to Hope's future. And Hope, alone with her thoughts, began the painful work of separating desire from identity, fear from truth. The story did not resolve neatly. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no definitive separation. Instead, it settled into a tense suspension, a fragile pause before consequences inevitably arrived. What had been unleashed could not be undone. Trust had been shaken, boundaries tested, and hearts exposed in ways that would leave lasting scars. As the days stretched on, one truth became impossible to ignore. The choice Hope faced was not about which man loved her more, but about whether she would continue living in reaction to others' expectations, or finally claim ownership of her own desires. The resolution, when it came, would not simply redefine her relationships. It would redefine her sense of self, and in doing so, reshape the lives of everyone who loved her. And somewhere beneath the surface, the question lingered, unresolved and dangerous. When obsession mistakes patience for destiny, how long can restraint hold before history repeats itself once more?
Oh,